All right, and welcome back, everybody. We are chatting with Noah Bryden, talking about influential books and his own conversion and also other people's conversions. And I want to keep moving on the list, Noah, because I want to talk about Cross the Tiber at the end of the program. You had a very important book by John Henry Newman, The Essay of Development of Christian Doctrine.
Absolutely. And Gary, I think that in terms of the concepts being taught in a book, I think this was the single most impactful book on my ultimate reception to Catholicism, his concept of development of doctrine and the way that he expressed it. Now, I say that with a couple asterisks, because this is probably, in my opinion, the least accessible of all of the books that I've recommended. I mean, it is a dense and serious effort to get through it. An essay is a lie. It is a book. You know what I mean? So it's kind of a funny thing because I thought when I first heard it, an essay, I'm thinking, 20 to 50 pages if it's a long essay. Oh no, it's a book. It's a several hundred page essay, if I'm not mistaken. I don't remember offhand. But now that being said, it is a fantastic and comprehensive explanation of how Catholic doctrine has developed, why that is consistent with Catholic teaching, and sort of how that plays out kind of in particular examples, both kind of, well-known and sort of controversial at different points. I know it's hard because I'm sort of giving such a sweeping overgeneralization of a book, but I think that the core idea there, despite the fact that I don't think the actual essay is read in full very often, I think the idea remains one of the most influential on the modern church, if not. Is that I think that's probably a fair. Am I getting ahead of myself?
Yeah.
I don't think so, but
no,
yeah.
I think you're absolutely right on point. It explains the problem of why is it when I look on the pages of Scripture, I see the church in one form and I see the church today, it doesn't look like anything. It seems as if everything's an innovation. And so Newman's able to connect the dots and show, that no, there's a continuity, where organically it's identical, constitutionally identical, but it develops and it becomes more precise, more detailed. Yeah.
And it's fantastic because I think this sort of this working, in tandem with the When the Church Was Young, which I mentioned earlier as being very helpful in sort of adjusting my framework and sort of helping adopt that Catholic worldview. I think kind of When the Church Was Young, kind of from the early church perspective, and then, Newman from kind of a modern perspective looking back. I think sort of the combination of those two books is what kind of really helped me sort of develop kind of a new framework, a new kind of way to approach church history, doctrinal history and development and all those things. I think some of the other books I recommended are more kind of zooming in on particulars, right? Helping understand particular doctrines, particular distinctions, particular controversies. Whereas the first book that I mentioned, as well as this essay on the development of doctrine, were very much framework altering, which I think, is perhaps the biggest kind of pivot one can make, because once the framework starts to shift, then you start to kind of, knock down doors, left and right, because you start seeing the world through a different lens, seeing all the things that might have been inaccessible previously become accessible because you have new keys to unlock new doors. I'm not sure if I'm making any sense. I'm speaking in symbols, but for me, it was fantastic. Like I cannot recommend it enough to someone who is genuinely struggling to see how the modern Catholic Church is representative of the early church. Someone who generally if that is a sincere blocker to you, whether due to the nature of what the church looks like or the nature of how doctrine has seemed to change, this is the book for you. Like if you want to really do a deep dive, this is the number one book that touches on that, I think, from a Western English-speaking perspective. And then in addition to that, I think it's just worth mentioning that Newman, of course, was another Anglican who converted to Catholicism. So for me, similar to what I said about Chesterton, there was sort of that I understood his previous context as well. And so then he kind of helped me see what ultimately became my future context, that is, Catholicism.
Yeah, very good. Now, we moved from a rather dense book to an incredibly accessible, thin book, Why We're Catholic by Trent Horn. I was actually surprised to see this on the list, so tell me about it.
So it's interesting. So I read this fairly late, and to be candid, I think that this one I think I was already convinced of Catholicism by the time I read this. So I just want to kind of, for anyone who avoids clickbait at all costs, this one might be a little bit of a stretch to include on what was impactful on my own conversion. But I think it is the most, like, almost the most helpful summary of what happened in my own intellectual progression over 13 years. And it's hard to do that, right? Because he talks about it from sort of the atheist to, deist perspective, as well as kind of to the Christian perspective, as well as to the Catholic perspective. And that sort of sequence, that logical sequence, I think it's a really helpful summary. So it was almost something that I encountered after the fact, and it helped me understand my own journey better as a result of reading it. If that makes so that's why I included it. And I think it has a lot of merit for a lot of people who are struggling just to even know where to start, and I've heard from a lot of people that this has been a very helpful way for them to just kind of make sense of even the conversations that we're having, or even the conversations that led the 10 conversations before it, that led to this type of conversation. It's just a great kind of starting point. It wasn't my starting point, but I think it's worth reading for someone who's just like, should I be Christian? Should I believe in God? Should I be Catholic? How the hell do I make sense of all these different claims that it seem to contradict? That type of a thing. I think it's a helpful starting point.
Yeah, absolutely. And the last one is Rome Sweet Home by Scott Hahn.
So this one is also, I would say, quite accessible. The reason that I included this is because this one I read kind of midway through my decision. So I was not yet decided, but I was sort of leaning heavily, I think, in favor of Catholicism when I encountered this book. And I stumbled upon it, I think, because I actually watched a video of Scott Hahn's, and I just started looking up what his claim to fame was, and saw that that's kind of his conversion story. So I wanted to read it because he came from a similar background as I did, the Calvinist. Right. And I thought that he just did a really good job of helping identify, explain, and categorize the transitions that I had already been going through and was going through. So he almost like put labels on all of the things that I was kind of, experiencing organically, actively, like in my own life. He almost like helped me think about it in new terms, because he had made the exact leap from Calvinism to Catholicism that I was making. So he kind of finished the translation, kind of closing the translation gaps that I had from my Calvinist mentality, and in particular with respect to covenant theology, which is a very large driving force in Calvinist theology, is this concept of covenant theology. And this book talks about how Catholic theology and Catholic understanding of doctrine is actually the proper understanding of covenant theology. And it's a really fascinating examination of how that is realized in the Catholic family and the Catholic Church. And I think it's very, very helpful, especially for someone coming from a Calvinist perspective. And then also, I was blessed that my wife became Catholic at the same time as myself. But for anyone who is not in that situation, and I know many people who they might become Catholic and perhaps their spouse is years behind or doesn't become Catholic. And if you're in that situation, this is also a fantastic read, because it shares the story from both Scott's and Kimberly's perspectives. And each chapter, one chapter is Scott's, one chapter is Kimberly, one chapter is Scott. And it's really fascinating because they were not in agreement the whole time. Let's just put it that way. Right. So if you're struggling with that, the relational dynamics of like, how is this going to hurt my family? How do I deal with this? How do I navigate, being convicted by God, but being compelled to love my spouse? And these feel in contradiction. Like, this book is fantastic for helping make sense of all that.
Yeah, excellent. Very good. Well, I want a fantastic list. So if people out there, I recommend you pick up all these books. It sounds fantastic, and it's very influential for you as well. And I imagine it helps you with your work with crossthe-tiber.org. So we have a couple of minutes left. Tell us a little bit about Cross the Tiber.
No, it absolutely does. And I think I've recommended all of these books several times, to different people. And I'm always looking for opportunities to talk about them, despite the fact that I promise I don't make any money from recommending these. So there's no book sales, there's no royalties for me, just, for your audience's sake. But I think this really brings us to Cross the Tiber because, one, we talked about it earlier, how these were individual friends oftentimes who were recommending these books, because these books impacted them. Right? Like, it actually helped them see things differently. They cared enough enough about me to share that. We had that kind of relationship, that context of community and trust to share it, where I actually was receptive to it. And then they actually followed up by recommending, oh, hey, get this book. And in a couple cases, they just sent me books, like, hey, would you read this? Yeah, sure. And they just bought it for me, so they weren't even pretty bold about it, but I read it, and maybe because I felt an obligation because they bought it for me, but hey, I read it, and then there was more opportunities for conversation. And I think that's exactly what we try to do in Cross the Tiber. We're not trying to recreate any information. I mean, we're blessed with 2,000 years of beautiful tradition and doctrinal explanations. What we're trying to do is personalize and sort of package what's already out there so that it actually makes sense to the person asking. So we sort of aim to be, I like to think of us as the relational bridge connecting the actual people seeking information about Catholicism with the information about Catholicism. So we don't aim to recreate the wheel. We're not trying to add, Lord willing, we don't add anything to it. That's definitely would not be our goal, right? But we try to pair people with individuals who can actually relate to them on their context, from their background as best as we can, in order to actually understand where they're coming from, so that when we provide answers to hard questions about why the church teaches this or why this is that way and not the other way, there's actually a shared common ground, and that just helps establish credibility. So we're effectively trying to, virtually recreate the community that I was blessed with, because we know that not everyone has access to Catholics who are friends and able to do that. So if anyone is out there who is not a Catholic but interested in learning more about Catholicism, there's no pressure or obligation to convert. We really do aim to be a community and a resource for you. So we never ask you to agree with us, but we do our best to charitably and accurately point you to the truth. So if that is of interest to you, please join us. And it's entirely free and entirely online at crossthe-tiber.org. So thank you, Gary.
Yeah, fantastic group, fantastic concept, and you guys do a great job at facilitating that. So you get to pair people that are on the journey, coming from similar backgrounds, and I think it's a fantastic ministry. So check it out, folks, crossthe-tiber.org. Noah, hey, thank you so much for coming on the show. We appreciate it.